Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Chavez, a venture associate with Capital Factory, and today we are hosting the Intro to Fundraising and AMA Defense Edition with Craig Cummings. Now, before we start, we're going to have Josh Baer, our CEO, join us to share a little bit more about Capital Factory.
Howdy, my name is Joshua Baer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Capital Factory. Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas, the #1 state for startups in the US. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. With boots on the ground in Austin, Dallas, and Houston, we meet the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to their first investors, employees, mentors, and customers. Capital Factory has invested in more than 300 Texas startups over the past decade. Whether physically in person or virtually online, Capital Factory is buzzing with energy and activity every day. Start with all the geekiest events on meetup.com and sprinkle in out-of-town guests, book signings, hackathons, innovation conferences, and pitch events. We're talking about thousands of participants every month. Most of the events are free, open to the public, and streamed over the internet. Capital Factory is all about community. Everyone's here to meet other people who can help them on their journey or to help others find their way. We kick off every morning with a text-based Ask Me Anything session with a mentor or investor in our Slack channel. Anyone in our community can ask questions in real time, and everyone else can see the answers. These are some of the most active investors and the most successful entrepreneurs in Texas. Those same mentors and investors do regular office hours where they volunteer a few hours a month. It's easy for any of our community members to find people with specific interests or expertise and to book a 30-minute meeting with them. With hundreds of mentors and investors in the network, there are dozens of meetings happening every day. Our co-working space provides desks, offices, conference rooms, classrooms, a podcast room, a video conferencing booths, and more. But the most important spot is the kitchen, because that's where everybody comes together. That's the real reason everyone's here, to meet each other. And every day at Capital Factory is demo day. Maybe it's the local angel investor network or a venture capitalist from out of town. Maybe it's one of the Fortune 500 scouts looking for new tech or a state or federal government official. It's delegations from other countries, school kids, army generals, and celebrities. We've helped entrepreneurs get in front of Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, and even President Obama. How do we know who to put in front of the president? Well, first, they go through an intensive interview and assessment process where they're vetted by our staff and our mentor network. We categorize them by industry and technology and score them based on traction and potential. Then, they have to work their way up to the top. On the way, they'll often meet with members of our Innovation Council of Fortune 500 scouts looking for startups with technology that can give the big companies a competitive advantage. They're hanging out in the kitchen of the co-working space and in our Slack channels online. They partner with startups to go after big government contracts with the Army Futures Command, Air Force Ventures, and the Texas Military Department. The money is flowing. In the past year, 30 startups in our community received more than $60 million in non-dilutive funding through government programs. Capital Factory is also the official Google Tech Hub for Texas. Google plugs us into a global network of other entrepreneurial communities and creates unique opportunities to help our startups attract investors, increase diversities, and access Google services. All of this activity creates exclusive deal flow and data for our investment fund. Our goal is to invest in the best deals in Texas, no matter who leads them. Over the past 10 years, we've secured $110 million in pro rata, super pro rata, and follow-on rights in more than 600 companies. We watch them all interact with our mentors, investors, Innovation Council, and each other, so we know which ones to invest in. Some of our most successful companies include Aceable, Coder, Data.World, Icon, Sensei, Storable, and WP Engine. Are you ready to quit your job and become an entrepreneur? Do you know someone who is? That's who I want to meet. And those are the kind of people who I can introduce you to. You can message me directly on Twitter at Joshua Baer or email me at josh@quityourjob.com.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Josh. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our guest today is Craig Cummings. For those of you who don't know, Craig Cummings is one of the co-founders, along with Kelly Perdew, of venture capital firm Moonshots Capital, a firm that actively invests in technology startups, many of whom are founded by military veteran entrepreneurs. Craig was also the co-founder and former COO of RideScout, a mobile app that showed users how to get from point A to point B using real-time ground transportation information. RideScout was actually acquired by Daimler, i.e. Mercedes-Benz, back in September of 2014. Before he became an entrepreneur, Craig spent 17 years in the Army, a significant portion of that spent as an intelligence officer serving in support of the NSA. Craig was deployed to Afghanistan with the Joint Special Operations Command, where he earned the Bronze Star. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and bring Craig to the stage.
Hey, Jonathan. Great to see you.
Hey, how's it going, Craig? Long time no see.
Going great. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I know I went ahead and kind of read through your bio, but I think it's so much more fascinating to hear it from the actual source. So maybe we can start by you telling a little bit of your story and journey from the military all the way through being a VC.
Sure. Well, I think a lot in the audience, they're questioning my decision to get out in my 17th year of service, right? Because in the Army, if you do 20 years, you get that pension for life. But I just felt that I had to scratch the proverbial entrepreneur itch. As you mentioned, I had served most of my time in active duty as an intelligence officer with the National Security Agency. In fact, my last job in the military was the brigade operations officer, the S3, for the largest intel brigade in the Army. And that's at Fort Meade at the NSA. But I think I always had those juices inside of me when I was a captain in the Army, barely making any money. I was bundling together investors to invest in real estate properties. And as I watched others start their own companies, I said, this is something that I'd like to do. And I bet almost everybody on this call would say the same thing. So literally the day that I finished, for those in the military who will know what the term active duty service obligation means, it's the equivalent of an earnout. When I finished the earnout for having done a PhD at Columbia on active duty, that is when I exited the military and started entrepreneuring, started my entrepreneurial journey. And that first company, what I did, and this is another, I'll drop little footnotes in for the team. I was at NSA, I left, and I went back and sold the product back into the NSA. And the product the company was called BTS, Battlefield Telecommunications Systems. And we developed software to deploy a cellular network on the battlefield, which had never been done before. Because I knew coming out of the space that when we would knock down doors and grab bad guys and start to exploit information on their body, from documents to cell phones, soldiers were still driving that information back to a base. And so I went back to people I worked with. I said, hey, what would you think about a cellular network on the battlefield? They're like, well, of course, but you can't, cellular networks are towers, lay them in, concrete footings, set and forget. And I said, well, we have this capability, the software, we can make a mobile, secure, rugged. And they said, well, tell us more. So 2 years after I started that company, the government literally bought our software. It was basically an exit to the United States government, specifically to Army intelligence. And that was a pretty awesome event. So it made my family okay with me leaving the Army in the 17th year of service. Because, oh, by the way, two brothers who were also Army colonels, West Point grads, father, Air Force colonel, my mom worked for the Army. So my joke is we didn't have family reunions, we had family formations. So anyway, I'll try to pick up the pace here. So after that, then my brother from another mother, Joseph Kopser, who's many people on this call will recognize that name, said, hey man, I'm trying to get from my house in Arlington to the Pentagon, and I can bike and I can bus and I can carpool, and there ought to be a better way to organize this. And so we ended up starting RideScout, which was, as you mentioned, the best way to get from A to B on the ground. And We ended up selling that company to Daimler, maker Mercedes-Benz. All the while, once I started to make money, Kelly Perdew, who I met after he won season 2 of The Apprentice, a throwback show some will recognize. Kelly, after serving, working for Donald Trump for 15 months, went back to LA, became an advisor to LinkedIn, Pandora, started angel investing. And he started to send me deals, and I'm like, wow, I'm going to write a check into that, And, next thing you know, Kelly and I were sort of like operating as lead angels, and we joined forces in 2014 after the sale of RideScout. And we started investing as syndicates. So we bundle checks from $5,000 to $1 million, and we plow them into a company as one single investment. And then we said, hey, we're performing, our investments are performing. Most of them are led by military veterans. You don't have to be a military veteran, but we think there's some there with this thesis. And then we did a dedicated fund, Moonshots Capital Fund 1, and now we're on Moonshots Capital Fund 2. So in conclusion, you don't have to be a military veteran for us to invest in your company. Our tagline is we back extraordinary leadership. And obviously the military veteran stands right in front of, behind, underneath that moniker, but you don't have to be. So we look for great leadership, and that's our most important criteria for investment.
It's awesome and hell of a story. Thanks for sharing that, Craig. So before we dive into Moonshots Capital itself, I have to ask, I can only imagine how daunting the transition must be from going from a highly structured environment, which is the military, to one that is decidedly less so, right? The world of tech and entrepreneurship and startups. I can only imagine how daunting that must be for vets that are looking to become founders. What are some common pitfalls that maybe you experience in the process?
I mean, I think it's a great point, Jonathan, but I do think vets transition well in that environment. I like to say that military veterans like to be told to take the hill and then allow them to figure out how to take the hill. Don't tell them how to take that hill. So though we are embedded in this larger machine, this infrastructure, that flexibility to figure out how to best accomplish the mission directly ports over to entrepreneurship, because you are solving a problem, your company is solving a problem, and you need to figure out how to get it done. And for veterans in particular, we love the successes. I mean, failure is not an option, and so they fight till they get to the top of the hill. I think in terms of pitfalls. It's veterans are not used to having to raise money, asking people for cash, because when you're in the military, it just sort of shows up in your checking account. You're not having to provide that money to others. So I think that is something for veterans that often takes a little bit of getting used to. But again, I feel like they get there. I mean, I wrote a piece about a transitioning military veteran needs to act like a startup, and maybe we can post it in here. And I published it in Medium last summer. But as veterans make that uncertain transition, right, from this infrastructure that you discussed, what I call veterans to do as part of the transition is to develop an elevator pitch. It's like a startup. Mm-hmm. Like literally, okay, you went here, deployed to Fort here, went to Afghanistan, Iraq, this many soldiers, this much money, but tighten it. How do you tighten that up? And I think in that process of getting the elevator pitch down, they can really become comfortable with their skills. Like, wow, as I think about myself and all the things I've done, I think I can do just about anything on the outside. And my closing point is my elevator pitch was, I said, I have a top secret security clearance, a PhD from Columbia, and a Bronze Star. And it shows I can lead under pressure, read, write, and think. And I have the trust of the nation with its most sensitive secrets. And oh, by the way, there's only 12 people who have those in the military. And I know the other 11. And so, okay, I totally made that up, but it kind of resonates. Like, Jonathan, you may remember that elevator pitch. And so that becomes the door opener that gets you in. and then you take it from there. But it just points to veterans having broad skill sets to include entrepreneurship for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you did a really great job of pointing out how things that you learn under certain contexts can apply outside of that context, right? So what you just described is maybe not necessarily obvious to anyone who's in the military now and maybe has entrepreneurial aspirations, but they're picking up skills, they're picking up traits, they're picking up, little things here and there, even recognizing opportunities that might apply a little further down the road. So, great thing to point out. So you already mentioned this earlier, but the overarching thesis of Moonshots Capital, at least in part, is based on backing military vet entrepreneurs. Why do you think potentially other investors might be missing out on this opportunity?
Well, I think everybody knows badass veterans, right? We could ask everybody in this call, like, tell us about your favorite veteran. Everyone would raise their hand, and I think we all end up talking about sort of the integrity, the work ethic, perseverance. As I said, like, failure is not an option. And so I think DNA wise, like, it's exactly what any investor would want in a co-founder, and in particular among the military, is the coachability, right? And I think veterans, because in the military as part of the process, there's a breakdown, like they shake us down to ground zero in boot camp, let's just call it boot camp, but right. And then you have to build back up, and you're listening to those leaders. And we don't expect our founders to do everything we say. We just expect them to listen, process, digest, and be coachable. And I think in the military in particular, you see a lot of coachability, which we're drawn to. As an aside, in our first fund, of our 14 companies that we invested in, and this is just fund one, 36% of those companies had a veteran on the team. Although now over 50% of the dollars are backing veterans. 36% had a black or brown founder on the team, although only one was black, and we're working on that. But still. And then 21% had a woman, and we have one disabled founder, glass eye, Dan Foreman, love him. And our thesis, as I said, is extraordinary leadership. And then right is the military veteran, because it's our heritage.
Of course.
But what we found is that among other non-traditional founders, very similar DNA, like everything I just said at the beginning, like perseverance, grit, like all the hard work it takes to get in that room for a veteran who's usually served and not been in the ecosystem, not a graduate of Stanford, is what we often see of non-traditional founders. That sort of combination of scrappy and savvy, right? Like what they had to do to get in that room to pitch us. So it's just a side point about non-traditional founders, of which the military veteran is one of them, and what we like about that founder DNA.
Gotcha. Out of curiosity, do you ever, obviously maybe not in the last 12 months given COVID, but do you ever bring together, the companies that you back that have military vet founders and the ones that, maybe don't have that background, and maybe allow them to cross-pollinate and, potentially learn from each other?
Yeah, we do try to do that. I would say that's an area where we could probably improve. We are always looking for touch points across founders, and we're always, connecting them, especially those that are in the defense, the dual use space, which we'll talk about today. But yeah, you're always wanting to take best practices and leverage all those lessons learned across the portfolio, especially when we see opportunities like at the Capital Factory. So many amazing opportunities for dual use companies that we're like, all right, team, the team within the team, really take a hard look at this opportunity with the Capital Factory, consider participating in, this summit, this supernova, et cetera.
Awesome. So shifting gears a little bit to the fundraising grind, as a VC who does have operating experience, what are some important factors to take into consideration before you even go out to begin fundraising from VCs or any type of institutional investor?
That's a great question. Well, one thing I often will remind founders of is the amount of deal flow that we get, right? So at Moonshots, we get about 100 to 150 deals a month, right? So let's call it 1,500 deals in a year. And so, I joke that I say no for a living, right? Because we have to pass on most of the opportunities. But in terms of thinking about how you sort of begin that relationship, the joke, ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. But the key, the word I would call out would be the relationship word, just like we all know relationships matter. And it does matter with the VC, that because the answer is usually no initially, right? That's data point number one. Like, okay, we see Jonathan's company, we like what he's doing, we like him as a founder, but it's a little bit early. And for us, we're usually investing late seed, sort of last dollars before an A, and we're looking for ARR in the 50 and 500 to a million range, and that 50K up. And so you may not have it at data point one. And then I say, this is just out of Techstars and others' book, like, start an investor update, add me to it, add everybody to it, add your family to it, add your friends to it, and then drop me another update and keep me informed on what you're doing. And a lot of times, especially when we're drawn to the founder, drawn to the business, but need to see a little bit more, it's the data points that you plot for us. Now, getting in front of a VC is hard, right? I mean, I'm getting 200 to 300 emails a day, lots of deal flow. And so if you can, obviously the warm introduction helps. And especially for veterans on this call, I mean, if you map your veteran network to mine or Kelly's networks, there's going to be an alignment. And so the extent that you can get that warm introduction, it always helps. It's like, oh, I served with Jonathan and he just sent me this company, I'm definitely going to take a look at it. I hate that is sort of the reality. If it's going to be a cold email, and obviously sometimes that is where it is, then it needs to be like as awesome as possible. Like, Craig, saw you invested in the company Shep. Know you like the travel space. You were co-founder of a company in the transportation space. You might like this company that is doing something similar. So like that level of, is warming up the cold email, if you will, then get in the meeting. The meetings can be tight, like 20, 30 minutes. I'm just going to show you the product. I'm in, I'm out. And then building the relationship. Now, sometimes I'm going to be like, oh my God, we got to invest money right now. Jonathan, when I met the founders of Yonder at the Capital Factory office hours, as Josh referenced in his video, when I met Jonathan Morgan, I said, do not move. I'm going to go get my checkbook right now. Stay here. Sometimes deals are like that. You got to move quickly.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So you mentioned some of the more, quantitative factors that you look for in terms of a baseline criteria for investments that make sense for Moonshots. What are some qualitative factors that you might also take into consideration when you're evaluating an investment and, the founding team, obviously?
Well, we start collecting data points on the founders, right out of the gate, from the initial email to, to use Army language, how they shoot, move, and communicate, right? And you start to sort of suss out the leadership, especially in the case of military veterans. I can call and say, hey, Jonathan, we're looking at this company. You served with Mary. What do you think of Mary? Should I want to be in a foxhole with her or him? And I get that honest feedback from you, and that's very qualitative. It's really it's so many different factors. I mean, it's what it is at the end of the day. They're, especially those in the military in this call, will understand. There is a command. There's like a commander's instinct. There's your gut instinct, right? Which is thought through. It's not, that instinct is powered by pattern recognition, where you start to see, I like the way they communicate. This business, I think, is where the world is going. That's where the puck is going. But it's heavy on the quant side. Like we especially on the venture side, we see great companies all the time, especially led by military veterans. But sometimes they're just not venture backable, and it is the nature of our business, right? We have to have companies that essentially on their own can return the fund, right? So our fund one was a $20 million fund one, and we put $1 million in on the first check, and usually we reserve another $1 million to put behind. And our expectation, our hope, right, is that that $2 million investment 10x's and pays back the fund. And that obviously is not going to happen every time. We build that into the model, but it only takes one or two, right? And that's the venture model. And what can be frustrating about that is we'll see curves of businesses like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're like, that's a great business. Like, it's just great business. But because it's not this, right? We can't put our dollars into it because we have to have that sort of trajectory on the investment. So it's hard. I mean, as much as we back military veterans and we love it and we take calls and we end up saying no, obviously most of the time. But we try to be helpful in some way. And that's part of building relationships with VCs. And some of our investments have come almost a year or two later. Marcus Carey, many people on this call will know who Marcus Carey is, the CEO of ThreatCare, Navy veteran, NSA. I got to know him through Bunker Labs. And just, like most people, you fall in love with Marcus. And then as he was building the company, ThreatCare, we're like, all right, we're in. And then, he was our first exit out of Fund One when he sold his company to ReliQuest.
Is there anything that you would consider an absolute showstopper for the benefit of some of our guests?
There's not. We do look for, we call pro CEOs, and sometimes we journey into a conversation, especially around fundraising, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And if we see that the CEO does not understand the mechanics of fundraising, mm-hmm. like from our side and their side, and sometimes you'll see like, well, I think the valuation is this, which is totally out of line. And we see something that we know it's going to be such a heavy lift work-wise with that founder, even though there's a lot we like, but we just know like, wow, that there's a steep learning curve. Mm-hmm. If that steep learning curve is too much, then we just can't take it on because it doesn't allow us to do everything else we have to do across the fund management, from being on boards to fundraising and finding new companies. So, another thing is, we don't see this among veterans or defense companies, but when you see another organization trying to raise money for a company, and you'll see like, hey, I'm with this firm and we're representing X company, would you like to take a look at it? That we have never invested in a company that has another company help it raise money, like absolutely 0 times. I'm not saying there's not great companies that do that, but mm-hmm. that for us, to your question, is pretty much an automatic no, because you got to expect that the founder knows how to raise money, knows how to use a network, knows how to get those meetings, and doesn't rely on, and usually sort of a New York-based firm that says, hey, I'm going to help you raise that $2 million or that $10 million.
So something akin to like an investment bank or like a regional advisory firm?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That makes sense. Hey, just FYI for the audience, we'll start the AMA portion here in about 10 minutes. So feel free to start loading the chat with questions. So one thing I'm curious about, given your thesis on backing extraordinary leadership, doesn't sound like you're necessarily focused on any specific sector or vertical, but are there any sectors or verticals that you're particularly keen on, or that you've picked up interest in the last 12 months or so?
Great question. And I would say, in Fund One, we used to say, well, we like mobility and transportation, obviously my background. Kelly's got significant digital marketing chops, so ad tech and tech. We've invested in marketplaces. We like marketplaces. We like some direct to consumer. We like some enterprise software. Now we just say we are generalists. We've owned it. The one area where we have not invested out of the fund is in the med tech, biotech, health tech, which, in a COVID world, obviously we've seen a lot more of those deals. And I would say we know never to say never. We might start making investments in digital health. One of our early syndicate investments was in a company called Olive.ai, my very first company, that cellular company. My co-founder was Sean Lane. He's the CEO and founder of Olive.ai, which is AI in the healthcare admin space. And he just closed a round led by Alphabet at $1.5 billion post money. So we're investors in that, but that is usually an area we avoid. We haven't done anything in ed tech, insurance tech yet. Haven't done real estate. So there's pockets of areas where we haven't invested, but at the end of the day, it's this: we look at the leadership, right? Rule number one. We look at the market opportunity. We look at sort of the needs of that team. And for us, Kelly and I have been operators in 14 companies, so we're obviously comfortable in that early stage GUI, and we look for leveraging our operational expertise to help that founding team. But we layer in our expertise and our networks to that company. And if we feel like through the experiences and the people we know, it creates, the proverbial unfair advantage, that's when we invest. If we feel like we can't unleash any of our superpowers operationally or network wise, then we're not able to contribute the way that we want to and that we need to. So it's a long way of saying it's a little bit of case by case with some left and right boundaries.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine at some level, many VCs, I imagine experience this, but there's this pull between staying in your box and, taking it, investing in an opportunity that is especially, great, whether it's because of the founding team or the tech or whatever, but maybe you don't have the expertise in the space. I imagine that has to be a challenge.
It is. We see great businesses, even in cyber lately, right? And there's a lot of cyber in the defense space and a lot of activity. And I spent essentially career in the cyber community, inside of the Intel community. I was on the founding team, literally, of Army Cyber. It sounds weird to say that, and I don't want to overspeak it at all, but literally, we formed a company back in 1998 at Fort Meade, and we said, all right, cyber warriors come together. So anyway, the thing about, say, cyber is you have to be so current on that trade craft. Like, there's so many moving pieces, it's difficult for us to distinguish. So though we have some expertise, that's an industry where we have to have a lot of validation from some of our LPs and advisors before we pull the trigger. And I think a lot of people on this call can understand, especially in cyber, like, oh, we do this capability. I'm like, okay, that's awesome. I don't know how important that is. Sounds important.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up. Personally, and I think a lot of the other venture associates can agree, we've seen a lot within the last 12 months within cyberspace. One common theme I hear fairly often is, or really the rationale behind these type of companies is, now that everyone's working remote, the potential vectors of attack has expanded almost exponentially. And thus there's this need for, greater solutions that can account for distributed workforces, right? That's really interesting you bring that up. So I think this is a good transition into talking a little bit more about defense companies. So my question to you is how do you feel about investing in defense companies, and what do you look for?
Well,
not a question, I know.
Generally VC firms tend to be a little bit chilly, right, on the defense space. They don't know it. Same way like us in health tech. I don't know FDA. I don't know how that approval process goes. And so it's a little bit of a black box, but there's obviously huge opportunity, and especially huge opportunity with Army Futures Command, what they're doing in Austin and beyond. We definitely want to invest in dual use technologies, but we do need to see the viability in both the defense space and the commercial space. And oftentimes it's led by the defense opportunity, right? If you take the case of Red 6, who we met at the Capital Factory, sort of thanks to the Capital Factory, and they do augmented reality in the visor of a fighter pilot's helmet, right? So you can engage with synthetic augmented reality targets. It is like mind blowing what they do, and they're doing very well. And though a lot of their discussions on the commercial side are early. They're happening, and we can sort of see them. We can translate, like, okay, we know how Delta Airlines would use this. We know how gaming companies would use this. Sometimes in the defense space, we see companies that are so niche in government, like that. Just and what's almost unfair sometimes about defense companies is that the government says dual use, right? And because they like it, they like the validation of the commercial market before they buy. But sometimes it's like the button needs to go here and then here, and then can you put a dial here and then paint it this color, make it ruggedized. And so you end up having to do a large amount of customization, and right. And the VC brain is copy paste, rinse, repeat, scale. And so you worry that you could end up having companies that get down rabbit holes. Great use cases, but it's like this program in the Air Force. So to the extent we can see that application broadly across the military and truly understand it, and it's presented to us, to be honest, like a commercial opportunity, like the slide deck, some of the slide, like if I were to weight decks I receive, the defense ones tend to be like the wordy, like sciencey, they do like a the quad chart, the classic quad chart. When we want to see, simply stated problem, simply stated solution, what are the unit economics? Tell us about the team, tell us about the market opportunity, and help us feel that. So it's a little bit of a footnote in the discussion about the deck matters, but the deck matters, especially when you get 1,500 deals a year. You want to, if I end up having to work too hard to understand what that defense capability is, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. Brian Chambers always says a confused mind always says no, and it sounds like this definitely applies in this case.
Yeah, I love that. Brian's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's it's interesting that you point that out. The importance of brevity in a pitch deck, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not just you that the founder is selling to, right? You're going to have to gauge their ability to get you to understand what they're building, and see if that applies to pitching actual customers or pitching potential senior hires or anyone else that you're essentially selling the concept of the company on. So we're going to start the AMA here shortly.
Sure.
So I want to wrap up here briefly. What's the best way to get an introduction to you or any VC for that matter?
Well, I'm at Craig at Moonshots
There you
Capital.com. Not too difficult to figure out. I think if there's a warm intro, then seize that opportunity. But a lot of times after events like this, I'll say, "Hey, Craig, I saw you at the AMA Capital Factory, wanted to follow up." And so I try to be good, as good as I can with email and try to respond. I'm not an A+. Probably a B+, A-, closer to B+. But I especially for veterans, I always try to point them in a certain direction. But look, top 3 talking point, usually at the top is be a capital factory company. Try to become a capital factory company. It is a massive ecosystem. It is a massive muscle, but the muscle must be flexed. Like the capital factory is not going to serve it all up for you. Like say, here's exactly what you need to do. It's like, here are these people, here are these opportunities, here's all this activity happening. And so I'm always going to end up, I'm pretty ruthless about saying it's worth the investment, usually associated with capital factory membership, both the dollars and the equity, depending on where the company is, just to get that muscle as part of your company body, if you will.
Awesome. Now, one last question for me before we switch it over to the audience. What's the kindest thing that anyone's ever done for you, whether in a professional setting or a personal setting?
Well, this is, I don't want to be too rabbit holey, but it does tie in with Josh Baer, so I'll bring it up. But longtime friend recommended me for an opportunity called the Henry Crown Fellowship, which lives inside the Aspen Institute. And my humble brag is that it's the most prestigious fellowship you've never heard of. And Doug recommended me for this. Doug McCormick, sorry, military veteran on the East Coast. And I had no idea. I was like, dude, I'm kind of busy. I don't have time for fellowship. I don't know. And it's a commitment of time. And it ended up that journey and definitely changed my life, that fellowship. Josh has that fellowship, Brett Hurt, Dan Graham, Carla Sublett, Randy Shade, Beth Goff McMillan. It's an amazing network. And so I guess if I were to sort of make it a little more generic, it was seeing an opportunity to promote somebody and then finding a way to provide that unbeknownst. There was no ask, there was no reciprocity. It wasn't transactional. It was just like, hey, I think you'd be great for this opportunity. And it changed my life. And sometimes that's recommending a startup for a pitch competition, like the Black Summit, Founder Summit coming up, and saying, hey, I don't know if you know about this. And then that founder ends up winning or finding investors. So it's finding ways to pay it forward sort of quietly. And that one that Doug McCormick did for me was massive.
Yeah, it's incredible how powerful a single connection could be, right? And thankfully here at Capital Factory, we help produce hundreds of them every day. So with that being said, I think
let me I'll be quick here. I'll tell you a great Capital Factory story for the team. So there was a company that I was on the board of and investor in, a company called Ed Backer. It was based in DC when I lived in DC. I moved to Austin. Founder comes down again. He's starting to meet with clients for his ed tech company. This was an angel investment and then a syndicate. And I said, you ought to consider joining the Capital Factory, Gary. He's like, well, Craig, I live in DC. I'm like, but you're down here and it's a big muscle. We can maybe flex it. And so Gary did not get to spend a lot of time in the Capital Factory. He just didn't. This is when obviously physical world. This is a few years ago. But he would say, Josh, I'm coming to town. Let me know if anybody I should meet. And on one of those visits, Josh said, I want you to meet this individual. And Gary ended up selling the company to that individual. So
wow.
It was like Capital Factory did one thing, to your point, was introduce him to his buyer. And that was pretty powerful. So you never know, the serendipity.
Absolutely. That's a great story. Hopefully we recorded it so we can use it as a testimonial. All right. We'll go ahead and start with the questions from the audience. First one from Tayaba Ali. If we can pull that up. Awesome. TechPass recently transitioned defense with a human performance angle. Do you ever invest in solo entrepreneurs with a solid idea?
Great question. We have done that. I mean, if we end up falling in love with that founder, I'll just call it that, because that's usually what it involves, and just believing that founder is going to win no matter what, and we believe in the idea, and we believe there's enough upside in the idea, we will. Do we like teams? Yes, we like teams. We think it's helpful to have a co-founder for sure, but it's not part of the criteria. So as investors look at companies, you always want to look at the skill set, right? Mm-hmm. And usually it's hard to find all those skills in one person. You can have the tech, but you need the business, or you have the operator and you need the tech, or some combination that it's tough to find all of them in one. Sometimes you do, and then that person can build a team around them. But sometimes you're like, man, that's a little bit of a blind spot. Okay, maybe we can hire for that. That's why we have option pools, and we say, okay, we know this is going to be a key hire. So long way of saying yes.
Awesome. Next question from Alan Apple 64. Solid screen name. What do you think about the DoD announcement yesterday in regards to Trusted Capital Digital Marketplace?
I didn't see the announcement yesterday, but I've been a member of the Trusted Capital Marketplace since its infancy, and I've spoken with the team and advised them about how we might improve that marketplace. So I don't know specifically, but I like the idea that they made an announcement. I probably have some ideas about about what they did. I mean, what I told the Trusted Capital Marketplace was companies with SBIR, like a SBIR 1 is not as distinguishing as it used to be, right? Like it used to be like, wow, they got a SBIR 1 and they're tracking a SBIR 2, but there's so much activity in that space that it does not provide the curation that we need. Like when Trusted Capital brings a VC into a forum, I'd like to, to the max extent it's curated. For example, like a SBIR 2 with matching funds from AFWorks, who's looking for a co-investor, they'll get matching dollars, right? Like that's highly curated for me. That's beyond a SBIR 1. That's the government's ready to put in dollars. They're looking for a VC partner. And so my advice was, to the extent you can optimize curation for investors, like even putting together the list of like SBIR 2, who, to my point earlier, like have matching dollar opportunities, like just showing those companies to me is helpful, because deal flow is not my problem. So if I walk in a room and there's some companies have dual use and they've been vetted by Trusted Capital, but they don't have any government contracts, maybe, or they have a small one. It's not enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I need a little bit more on the curation side. And I hope hopefully they moved in that direction. But I know they've been leaning into it and trying to strengthen it. The truth is they had a very small team, and so maybe that will evolve here, especially with the new administration.
Awesome. We have a question from Rebecca. It'll be here. Yeah. Most non-traditional founders are first-time founders. How do you think about the risk associated with investing in first-time founders?
Well, I think we look for domain expertise, right? That is part of the formula. And sometimes we'll see founders who've come out of the space. Like if you were on the call earlier when I said my first company, I basically sold a product back to where I just came from, this organization, the NSA. So definitely domain expertise helps to de-risk. But it's a great question Rebecca's asking. She's like, it's about de-risk. We like things de-risks. Now, when you invest in early stage, there's only so much de-risking that you can do. So like the founder, like the domain expertise, we start to see some logos. We say, okay, Rebecca has some companies that are taking her product seriously. They may be in a pilot. And so you're starting to see that product market fit. That is especially helpful for non-traditional founders. But it's hard for non-traditional founders. It's hard, it's hard across the board, but we're mindful of that journey. Mm-hmm. And we loved getting to yes on non-traditional founders, but we don't paint ourselves in a corner that there's any sort of non-traditional founder requirement.
Understood. I think there was a question I missed from earlier from Nick Murda. If we could bring that up.
Yeah, we've talked about this. I would say we don't need to see commercial revenue, but we like line of sight to commercial revenue. We like the potential product market fit. We like interest. We like conversations, pilots. We like dual use in the sense that Kelly and I are both West Point graduates. We're both in the military. We have massive networks and DoD, Army Futures Command, boom, boom, boom. So the opportunity to help create that unfair advantage that I talked about through networks, we love dual use if we can find the right fit. In our investments to date, we have Yonder, which is the team that first discovered the fake Twitter and Facebook accounts coming out of Russia in 2016, Capital Factory company, dual use technology, customers on the private side and on the government side. And you can kind of see that case in what they're doing very cleanly. Red 6, I talked about, heavy in the Air Force now for obvious reasons, but use cases in the Army and on the outside. And so We have another company, Transmute, which another not a Capital Factory company, though known in the Austin ecosystem. Again, dual use from a supply chain perspective for government, non-government. So we just need to see it and get comfortable with it. We like it especially if we get comfortable with the case. And as I said, it's not too overly specific.
Yeah, understood. And we have a question from Scott Schneider. What does commercial traction need to look like if we've got good DoD traction, multiple SBR phase 2s, 3s, and direct DoD contracts, et cetera?
Well, look, I mean, there is a point in this case to if you have multiple SBIR phase 2s and a phase 3, you may not need commercial. It's not a hard requirement. You have to. It may just be crushing so much in defense that this company is going to be acquired by Harris, by Boeing, by Lockheed Martin. So it's not completely off the table. It just early on, you like to see that potential. To answer the question specifically, look, we would like to see, as I've said, some discussions happening. On the diligence side, we would call that customer and say, hey, Delta Airlines, tell us what you like, like this use case. And they say, look, we're moving forward. Leadership likes it. If the contract's in review, or they may say, oh, I've only had one conversation, but it's cool, but I've only had one conversation. So a few different ways to demonstrate traction other than just revenue. But obviously cash is king.
Oh, always. We did have one question that got sent in just before it started, the AMA. If you are new to the defense industry, how do you find experts in the field to join your startup as a team member and or as an advisor? And there's a side comment here. So far, I have joined DEF. I'm not familiar with DEF, and cold contacted individuals on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes to the earlier point around sort of mapping the network, right? Sort of being that intelligence officer and seeing what exactly it is that you're looking for. What sort of, is it operational experience? Is it they've done work with Cyber Command, or they've done work with FAA or with the Army? And then, getting a first meeting, someone who may or may not be a good fit, but said, oh no, you got to go talk to Jonathan. Jonathan will love this. So it's a little bit of sort of like network mapping to get there. So there's no super clean answer, but again, point number one, Capital Factory has a massive network of mentors through the union, through the activities, and just going to these events, the serendipity. I mean, it's a little bit harder, right? Not physical, but in a sense, it's almost easier, right? Too, like you can pop in these rooms, you'll see me in a room at these events, and you got to be a little bit scrappy. And look, on that point, as I said, my email load is pretty massive. All of ours is, for that matter, right? It's okay to ping a VC like, hey, Craig, sent to that email. I saw you on Capital Factory event, just top of inboxing you. I appreciate pings. Zero offense to me personally when I get a ping. I'm like, thank you. That was a tough day. I was off the net half a day and I have a black hole of like 30 emails. So I just want to encourage. I want founders to not feel like, oh, I don't want to bug Craig. I don't want to be, you gotta be. Sometimes woodpeckering is what it takes. Yep,
100% agree. All right, Craig, this has been fantastic. We're really appreciative of you taking the time to chat with us today. I think this has been a great event. I do believe we'll have a recording of this available on our YouTube channel. And I know you already mentioned this, but I think it would be helpful one more time to drop the easiest way to reach you, whether it's email or LinkedIn.
I mean, our website is Moonshots Capital, plural on the Moonshots, CAPITAL. I'm Craig at. If you seal a deal, if there is a deal with the military veteran on the team, we want that deal to find its way to our inbox. Again, does not have to be a military veteran, but for those on the call, especially a lot of vets are in the dual use defense space, we want to see that deal and at least take a look at it and do a quick triage of it. So if you see the deal, whether you're in New York, Seattle, military veteran, this is usually what happens to us. Someone at Techstars New York says, hey, there's a Navy SEAL on this team, Jonathan Chavez, you got got to meet this team. That we like that. So please do. Deal flow is lifeblood of any investment firm.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Craig. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you around next time in Austin.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Good luck to everybody. Keep at it. Appreciate it, Jonathan.
No problem. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.